place anytime devices. Teacher learning is becoming something teachers own, and it's becoming something that teachers do any place and any time. If you're curious about this, I hope that you will buy a book. So just to remind us of some things about any kind of teacher learning. Often when we talk about something like mobile learning, the assumption is, oh yeah, we've got to teach teachers to develop fluency in using devices and media and apps and so on, which is true. But that's not the primary emphasis, because learning technologies are not like fire. You don't get a benefit from using learning technologies are expensive. The only way in which they're useful is if they drive us towards deeper content, more active forms of learning, more authentic forms of assessment, and links between classrooms and life. So a lot of the core principle of teacher learning with technology is to focus on these themes. We also know that in the long run, while professional development or teacher education has its value, because the world keeps changing quickly, continuous peer learning is going to be the best strategy for long-term improvement. So we want whatever we do in teacher learning to build the capacity and the infrastructure for continuous peer learning. The other thing that strikes me about a lot of professional development is that, unfortunately, teachers get to listen to 1-hour lectures about the importance of learning by doing. What's wrong with that? Right? The media contradicts the message. And what teachers remember is not about all the theoretical support for active learning. They remember that somebody lectured them. So if we're going to have teachers use mobile learning fluidly, whether it is in-service, pre-service, or outside of classrooms, they're going to need to learn that in a way that's by a lot of mobile learning. And they're going to need to learn that in a way that takes advantage of the power of technology, not simply to automate teaching by telling, but to move towards the collaborative inquiry-based forms of learning that are the real power of learning technologies. And this requires unlearning, because all of us went through the industrial era schools where we got a lot of teaching by telling. And some of us, like me, spent a lot of time doing teaching by telling as teachers before the research and the devices and the infrastructure came along to support something else. So I find myself constantly having to unlearn old habits. And you may say, well, that's fine for mature teachers, but what about teacher education? People come into teacher education with a lot of unconscious beliefs and assumptions and values about what teaching is based on their experience as students that often they have to unlearn. So those are some touchstones to think about as you listen to these different models. The other thing that I want to highlight is resources. Is that Julie and I were involved in producing a couple white papers for Qualcomm that are available for free on the internet. One of them is about K-12 mobile learning, and includes cases of different projects around the world that are doing mobile learning effectively. So when we ask, what are we preparing teachers for? This is a resource to consider. The other is a white paper on mobile learning within the context of higher education. And in particular, we are looking at some of the teacher education programs that are using mobile learning well. So that's part of the theme in that paper. So some thoughts and some resources. Each of the presenters will introduce themselves as part of their 6 minutes, and I'm going to turn things over to Kathy.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. And I'll take that. Chris will help remind me maybe a minute before time's out. Because when I start talking about things I'm passionate about, I get carried away. So I'm here today to share an experience that I was involved with a few years ago. Starting in 2012, I took an interim position as a director in the School of Education, and I've been involved with this tenure line faculty many years before that. And during that year, an opportunity came up to begin to look at how we could change practice within our teacher preparation program to include more mobile devices. We knew this was important. We knew that we needed to make the change, but how do you get there? So in getting there, we first identified that we needed to look at the curriculum and really embed meaningful experiences, as Chris described. Our program happens to have classes that go all day rather than hour by hour, so you actually have one of your methods classes all day, so that is a good model in terms of doing collaborative learning. So that was a good starting place. We wanted to identify sustainability, and that's always a challenge with everything. You look for ways to sustain, and we asked each program that entered into the pilot to have a plan by the end of the year for how this would sustain or move forward. And so they submitted something at the end of the year. This happened to focus on iPads, although it evolved to all technologies. But we had some support that was very important for this moving forward from our university, from our IT department that said, because you're a college of education, we know that you are experts in pedagogy. So in order to move our whole university forward, we're looking to you to begin to share how mobile devices really fit into learning environments. So we had that support. Our districts were very excited. All of our teacher preparation courses are taught on a campus of an elementary and middle school or the high school for some of their sessions. The sustainability plans led to what I'm going to describe in the next slide is where we are today. We did have a lot of support that we had through, we provided professional development for faculty to really learn how to use the devices better. Many already had their own device, or they could check out one in order to get started. We had our middle level program that focuses on the middle school grades. Was given one-to-one in their program. It was one cohort of teachers, and that was the support from the university. In our education school, we bought carts that were used for the single subject program, and in multiple subject, they looked to whatever was available at the school or what the students already had. There were other programs, but I'm not going to go into every single one. So if you could go to the next slide. Oh, I have the clicker. Thank you. Oh, that was when I was thinking I was on the clicker. Sorry, that's what happens when you go first. So we had a trainer that came in, Chapman in the audience actually listening to this. We have a distinguished teacher in residence that we honor actually 2 each year. That help us, and you see on the right there that teacher who had been in a one-to-one classroom, so she actually modeled for faculty. And then we had students, you see in the lower picture, we had a couple of students that teachers could make one-on-one appointments with to help them, because those university students had those skills and used them in their classes. So this is how we started our program, and then I'll go to where we are today. So I checked back with all the programs. I was only in the director position for a year, moved back to faculty, and have been involved in some other work that I'm doing, not really staying in touch with that program completely. So what I found from all the programs was that today, most students, and we are a Hispanic serving institution, I might mention at San Marcos, so we have a very diverse population. Most students, they said 80 or more %, have their own devices. We do have the ability for any students that do not have a device to check one out for the year, not week to week. So there are devices available for those that don't have them. And then the students, the curriculum has evolved in many different ways in each program in order to make it meaningful. So I listed some apps and some of them are software, some are environments, some are some apps that are used specifically in subjects such as mathematics and science that the teacher programs are using, and then the faculty told me that not all students take that to their student teaching in the classroom. It depends on where they're placed and when the technology is available. The first year we did have Apple devices, Apple TV devices that they could check out and use when they went to the sites, and we even sent a university person IT person that actually went out and helped each school set it up so that we could use it. And that became very challenging because honestly what they found, and you probably found this too, every school set up differently. And so it was really a very time-consuming thing. So I'll end with, if I were to do it again, what would I do? Chris asked me to consider that. I think most of what happened, I would do the same way again. I think it was very effective and it has led to the right thing. Instead of buying devices for everybody, and then it turns out the students have their own. If they have their own device, they're going to use it more effectively. And unfortunately, we can't buy devices for everyone, but they do have that access. The one thing we didn't do, and it was partly because we were, I'll use the word dumped, but the opportunity came up unexpectedly, and it wasn't that I planned it from the beginning. My dean invited me in. They had had Apple come to a meeting. They said, we need to be forward moving. What can we do? And it all evolved. What we did not do is a needs assessment. I think it would have been more helpful to find out exactly who had devices, who didn't, in terms of faculty, what their prior professional development was, and a little more about the schools before we began. So that would be where I would focus if you're considering moving forward in this area. All right, and now I'll be answering questions later if you have them. Thank you very much.
I'd like to, and maybe invited by Chris to be in this session, I started thinking about, what are the challenges that a college of education has in really coming up with a new initiative. We were addressing the issue of mobile learning for professional development. When we started, we were the first public university to have a laptop requirement. We're talking about, this is like 21 years ago that we did this, and I started trying to think about, the path that we went through, what the challenges were. We call it the LIFE program, the Laptop Initiative for Future Educators, and we clearly saw the need for building community among students, faculty, clinical supervisors, supervising teachers, and permeating the entire professional development sequence with technology. And if you're planning an initiative, there are a number of things that you need to think about. And obviously, our goal, think back, some of you 20 years ago, colleges of education were still being criticized for not preparing teachers that were able to effectively integrate technology into their teaching practices. And so we knew that we had to do something transformational to make that happen. And so that's when we decided to introduce the laptop requirement. And in thinking about that, we used basically the activity system model in planning this, because we needed to think about all of the rules that we had to deal with, university rules, school rules, department policies. We needed to think about the entire community. We needed to think about, what artifacts, what tools were going to be incorporated in this, and keeping our focus on who the focus was. It was on students, obviously, but also on faculty, because we needed faculty to be able to model effective and powerful uses of technology to transform teaching and learning. Because as Chris is saying, lecturing about it has very little effect. And as we were starting this, and if you were planning a mobile learning initiative, these are some of the things you need to think about. Building a shared vision, and we spent some time working with all the teacher education faculty. We wanted to have a partner, and Apple was the only one that really understood at that time the concept of partnership we were talking about. So we had many discussions, we had extensive professional development, but we had faculty engaged in thinking through this entire process. What is this initiative going to look like? And we also realized we didn't have the support systems in place. So we had to build the instructional support systems, the tech support systems, and if we're talking about mobile learning, our aspect that was most critical to us was building online communities of practice between students, faculty, mentor teachers, and clinical supervisors. And there wasn't a tool available at that time to do that. We built our own, we called it TeachNet. But then we had to build faculty capacity to utilize the set of tools. So one of the things, if you're going to be implementing mobile learning for teacher professional development, you need to be thinking about those change strategies. And one of the realities is that technology changes exponentially, and social systems like colleges of education, they change incrementally. So your goal is to have the incremental change move as quickly as possible. The other aspect, we did have faculty that were innovators, and so what we did, we created what we call vision awards to enable the early adopters to model the effective use of that. So if you're thinking about implementing mobile learning, you need to think about the change strategies that you want to use. Now, if you do it properly, you can have a significant effect. At the first year, our student perceptions were that ISTE was being used 25%. 2 years later, we had over 75%. But the other thing you have to realize that no matter how much faculty development you provide, how expensive that is, that some faculty will still not be using it very well. But that's not really critical, because we also found that if they have 2 or 3 faculty that are modeling it well, that's what they remember, and that's what they carry with them when they move into their own classrooms. One more minute?
One more.
Oh, yeah. So these are the critical factors: faculty development, dependable tech support, and also building relationships between instructional support, tech support, teachers, clinical supervisors. Those relationships have to exist, and we have to build trust, and everybody has to understand why are you doing this and how are we working together to accomplish it.
Hi, I'm Lori Henry from the University of Kentucky. I'm Associate Dean of Clinical Preparation and Partnerships there. And really thinking about how we need to shift teacher education. In the state of Kentucky, so many of our districts have gone to one-to-one models, and finding that our students are graduating from teacher preparation programs but not having the skill set that they need to really teach effectively within those classrooms that have one-to-one devices. And so we started with really thinking about how we could innovate and shift our models within teacher preparation to better prepare our students as they went out into classrooms. We've done this by really looking at how we structure our teacher preparation programs. And you can see here from the middle level program, which is fairly typical of teacher education, is our students have a 4-semester sequence. And their field experiences started right for that first semester with embedded field experiences. But we wanted to make sure that we were using these embedded field experiences to be very intentional about how we would integrate technology instead of having a standalone technology course, but really thinking about embedding it deeply into the field experiences within the environments that these students would eventually graduate into as teachers. And so looking at our periods of practice, we had our two semesters in the middle level program that were embedded in schools prior to doing the student teaching. And here we have in the first semester, we have 2 of our courses are taught on site at local middle schools. One of the courses is the adolescent learner, and really looking at how middle schools are structured, and then also their first content literacy course. So they're taught by faculty members that go out to the local middle school. Students are on site 2 full days during the week. Courses from university are taught during the morning hours, and then after that, the students go out into the classrooms for the rest of the day. So they're really getting a full day of embedded instruction within a middle school environment. We also want to be really intentional about these focused field experiences, providing opportunities for the students to not just be placed with the teacher, but to actually shadow an adolescent for the day. Really look at how one particular student might behave differently in different environments, especially when it comes to technology and levels of motivation and engagement. Our students also do ethnographic studies around technology in the school buildings, looking at how teachers are leveraging technology in the classroom to improve learning for students. So with our intentional focus field experiences, we really have them do these school-embedded courses. Our students participate in co-teaching, so right from their first semester, they're co-teaching with a classroom teacher. They're doing some focused observations. And then we started 2 years ago a partnership with the University of Louisville, which is about an hour away from the Lexington area where the University of Kentucky is. Louisville is a very urban center, and so the school districts there are very different than the school districts in the Lexington area. So we wanted to provide our students opportunities to engage with different types of students and different types of teachers. So through back channeling, what we've set up here is we have a student take an iPad into a teacher's classroom while instruction is taking place. They're using FaceTime. You can see the photograph of the classroom set up here where you can see today's meet on the large screen. Prior to having today's meet on the large screen, that is where the FaceTime video would show up. So this would be our pre-service teachers sitting in a classroom in a school with a faculty member from the university watching live streaming from the classroom. While they're viewing that live streaming, they're using the today's meet back channel to start to ask questions of the classroom teacher while they're seeing what's happening. Once the teacher finishes the instruction, and it's actually the teacher standing next to the screen in the photograph on the right-hand side, that teacher leaves her classroom and comes down to the class where our pre-service teachers are and begins to answer those questions. So the students are able to really apply directly what they're learning in their methods classes to what they're seeing in a classroom. Feedback from the students has been extremely positive. They love the opportunity to make those connections, being immersed in the classroom setting, and really find a lot of value in being able to be on site at the middle schools, away from the university campus, and really seeing immediately what goes on in the classroom and being able to apply what they're learning in their methods courses. The second component that I wanted to share with you is our UK Next Generation Leadership Academy. And we're in our 5th year of Leadership Academy, and this program is provided for district leadership teams and teacher leader teams to really think about how to innovate learning environments within schools. Currently, we have 30% of our districts in Kentucky have come through our Next Generation Learning Academy. 40% of those districts are returning districts as they've come with multiple teams for multiple years. We are in the process of sustaining this program by reducing the initial grant costs that piloted the program and really looking at the effectiveness of this program. To date, we've trained 363 district leaders in our state. What we've done with this is we're taking our pre-service teachers and having them do peer learning fingertip to fingertip with district leadership teams. So you can imagine a pre-service teacher during their student-teacher semester being able to sit down in a room with district leadership teams, superintendents, principals, teacher leaders, instructional coaches, and help train them on how to use digital technologies in their own buildings. Some of the challenges that we have encountered, of course, is the effective use of mobile technology by faculty, not just shifting things from paper to a mobile device, but really looking at how you can leverage that technology to change pedagogy in the classroom. We do, as always, in higher ed, have some resistance to change, so really being able to bring faculty along. We do have cohorts of faculty who have gone through our Next Generation Leadership Academy to help us kind of renew our curriculum and renew our programs in higher ed. We also have a lot of different levels of expertise among our faculty, so being able to get them up to speed and providing kind of integration versus an add-on approach.
most of our educational technology courses are separate from pedagogy, and that's more of an add-on approach. So we really want to have that integration fully embedded into our methods courses. And then, of course, state policy and licensure. We do not have a state requirement in the state of Kentucky around technology for our pre-service teachers once they graduate as new teachers. And so being able to change state policy that would really focus on effective uses of technology in the classroom and an evaluation or assessment of that for new teachers is the direction that the state needs to go.
Good morning. So I just want to share with you briefly, in a few minutes I've got to share with you, some pretty exciting news about what's happening around the digital divide. We're in a historically momentous moment, momentous time, I believe, because the resources that are becoming available to address the digital divide are about to increase exponentially. So we'll get into that in a moment. But first, just to frame why this matters in terms of educator preparation first. One of the challenges we need to take into account when designing a digital equity strategy for educator preparation programs is to make sure, as several colleagues have noted, that care is being taken to make sure that all pre-service educators, as well as faculty, but also cooperating educators have access to the devices and have access to broadband. This is as important for professional educators to have access as it is for the kids that they're serving, as we know. And so in addition to that, we need to make sure that pre-service teachers, the candidates and school leaders, future school leaders, that we equip them with knowledge about how to recognize when their K-12 kids are experiencing the digital divide. Because oftentimes kids, particularly in the middle and especially the high school level, seek to mask the fact that they don't have access to broadband and devices at home because they're embarrassed about that. And so one of the things we need to be looking at in educator preparation is how do we equip future educators and school leaders with the sensitivity to suss that out with tact without embarrassing kids. And then secondly, to know what resources are available to help the kids get access to these essential learning technology resources. And another piece of this is the cultural sensitivities to learn how to navigate when you have linguistic and racial and ethnic and other kinds of diversity among the K-12 population. How do we prepare future educators and school leaders to be sensitive to how to navigate in a rich context of diversity, to find out where the challenges to the digital divide stand. So these are key pieces of this. Another piece is that, and this draws on the experience that Paul was sharing at the University of Texas at Austin back 21 years ago. He pioneered an effort that really made sure that by requiring that every preparation program students have a device, that requires that the federal financial aid package provides funding in their financial aid for them to purchase a device, that's not a barrier for them. And so that's a piece of it. But here's where it gets a little more subtle, as we know that when you seek to place student teachers in a K-12 setting, that the access that student teachers will have and the cooperating educators will have, and clinical supervisors therefore will have access to in a school will vary from classroom to classroom, and not only in terms of the access, but also in terms of the pedagogical philosophy of the cooperating educators and school leaders about to how important do they believe it is that student teachers are going to have access, have opportunities to engage with kids in using these resources where they have them. And so there's a tremendous challenge about how do we think systemic by providing a level of consistency and quality of hands-on access to the essential learning technology resources. Does this make sense? In the student teaching experience. Because as everyone here has said, it's got to be much more than simply providing, equipping future educators with theory about all this. We need to provide an experiential basis, grounding in these challenges of the digital divide as possible. That said, and I'm going to take about 30 seconds. I have 2 minutes left. I'm going to take about 30 seconds of it if I can to tell you about a piece of news that's not out yet. But on May 18th, at the Net Inclusion Summit in Kansas City, the Federal Reserve announced a shift in policy that we think, and Paul and I have had a real hand in this, in shifting federal policy. There's a federal policy called the Community Reinvestment Act that governs banks, that requires that banks make investments for economic opportunity and revitalization in high poverty communities. CRA, Community Reinvestment Act. Banks annually commit $100 billion to meet this requirement. Historically, not a penny has gone for educational equity broadly, or for digital equity in particular, but the Federal Reserve has agreed that our pitch to them was it no longer makes sense if we're talking about requiring banks to make investments for for economic opportunity in a digital age where it's now the case that if you don't have digital access and skill, you can't find out about living wage jobs, you can't apply for them, and you can't qualify for them. So what they've agreed is, and this was announced on May 18th, that Community Reinvestment Act funding is going to be available moving forward, that communities can approach banks and say, how can we develop partnerships with you? And we had a meeting yesterday evening with leadership at ISTE, where we're going to be exploring how can we roll something out strategically. But this is going to open up hundreds of millions of dollars eventually for helping to close the digital divide for low-income kids, low-income learners of all ages. So the landscape really is going to change. I just wanted to sort of plant that as a brief flag. I'm almost out of time here. The other challenge I wanted to raise with you, and something that our colleagues have really talked about, is that we need to be reflective about our own pedagogy, right? The pedagogy that we're modeling for future educators and school leaders. And one of the things that we're doing in New Hampshire, which I'm very excited about, and this is neonatal, so I can't point to any students affected in this whatsoever, but I can certainly point to we're excited about the effort, is we've created the only statewide network in the country of teacher educators who said we need to band together and own the change process and own standards-based reform. I don't know if you're old enough to remember back when we owned the standards-based reform movement back in the late 80s and early 90s. We're seeking to re-own that and say, before we get clobbered by adversarial accountability, we're forming together to say, how do we change our own practice? And so one of the things that we're taking on now neonatally is how do we have a sustained conversation among methods faculty, cooperating educators, and clinical supervisors on what does good pedagogy look like so that we can support these kinds of efforts, not just in digital equity, but in technology innovation. Thank you.
Well, this has been fascinating, don't you agree? As Chris said early on, we assembled this dream team, and I've been so looking forward to having this opportunity to be here with all of you today. So we've had several different interesting points that have been brought up, and I want to do a little bit of a summarization before I throw another topic out there for us all. And I think it's really interesting that across the board, everyone talked about faculty, everyone talked about the pre-service candidate, and everyone talked about the partnership with the K-12 schools and districts. And I thought that was really significant, that there was really the creation of an ecosystem and not looking just at one particular silo. So from the faculty side, we heard wonderfully from Paul about this change strategy and the idea of being cognizant of that change strategy. And not everyone is at the same place at the same time, and being very conscious about that. We heard about, from Kathy, the idea that the faculty as well as the students may have their own devices. And that really changes the complexion of all this. I was involved a couple of years ago in a project with Georgia State University, and that was like an aha moment. Was that the students, the pre-service candidates, wanted to use their own devices rather than being given a device. It's an interesting thing from our work at Project Tomorrow that we hear the same thing from K-12 students. They want to use their own devices as well, interestingly. No surprise there. We also understood that the idea of embedding this within schools, within actual classrooms, is highly effective. And Lori gave us some wonderful examples of the work that they're doing around that as well. And I loved Chris's point that he started out with, and I haven't heard you talk about that before, Chris, so I love when I get a new Chris Dede experience, is this idea of the unlearning that even freshmen in college need to go through in their teacher preparation program because of the way that they have been taught, or the philosophies or methodologies that are just assumed to be this is what it is. One of the things that Project Tomorrow is very involved with is that we are introducing high school students to teaching as a career as one of our programs. And we actually see that ourselves. It's really hard because some of our advisors are high school teachers that are great teachers, but they are not teaching with an eye to the future. They're still teaching with an eye to the past, and unfortunately they are seeding some of that philosophy. And then this idea of bringing the K-12 into it, and thank you so much, Bob, for bringing in that digital equity piece, be it the homework gap or the digital divide or whatever label we wanted to put onto that. And so I thought that was really interesting the way that all came together. And quite honestly, we didn't sit for hours and sort of map this out. It just really comes to the value of the respondents that we have here. So the other piece that I want to bring into this is thinking again from the perspective of the K-12 schools and districts. What sort of demand is there for more mobile savvy teachers? You know, are our school principals satisfied with the quality of the candidates that they're getting? And I know that that's not necessarily a conversation that we want to dive deeply into because it can get a little uncomfortable. But understanding that idea of satisfaction and expectations is something that's really interesting. And we've been spending a lot of work at Project Tomorrow talking with both K-12 systems as well as teacher preparation programs about that alignment. So are we all on the same page in terms of thinking about where we need to go? So just a couple little things here for you from the Speak Up National Research Project polling that we did this past fall. And this is from about 2,800 school site administrators. We asked them about the perceptions of their satisfaction, and this is about digital learning in general, of their first and second year teachers. So we gave them a sort of a fence for their perception. So we see a couple things here. 16% said dissatisfied. That's not a number that we should ignore. It's a serious number. I think it's also interesting that 29% said they were neither satisfied nor dissatisfied. And I think we all know that probably means they were dissatisfied and just not comfortable saying which. I think it is interesting that when we look at 42% say they're somewhat satisfied, I would have been happier with seeing a higher number on the very satisfied. And I think that's probably all that we want. Now, quite honestly, when we disaggregate this data and we look at it associated with certain feeder teacher prep programs, we see different numbers. So this is the national average. But it is a wake-up call to not only think about the wonderful work that's being done on the teacher preparation program and all the innovation that we've heard discussed here, but also to understand how that trickles down to the school site principal in terms of what they're doing. So the other question that we have asked on the speaker surveys for the last couple of years is that we have been asking school site principals, so as you think about your next hires, as you think about the new teachers that are coming into your school, what type of expectations do you have for what you want them to know or have learned in their preparation programs? You know, for a long time I was hearing from principals, not anymore, but I was hearing from principals, you know, we don't need to worry about professional development 5, 10 years down the road because all these new teachers coming in are digitally native, to use that old term, and they will know how to do all this stuff. Well, we know that that is not the case. And so there is a need for this. So this idea of expectations is really interesting. So we find that the new principals are interested in capacity building. So do these new teachers know how to differentiate instruction? Do they know how to communicate with parents and students using different types of digital communication tools? Do they know how to use technology to facilitate student collaboration, which I think is really interesting when we think of some of the Common Core and other state standards around collaborative learning. But then they're also really keenly interested in making sure that these new teachers, aspiring teachers, have very focused skill experiences. And this is where we've seen the change over the last couple of years. So they want to make sure that these teachers have familiarity and comfort with using digital content, with managing a one-to-one class, with managing a class where the students are bringing in their own devices and using their own devices. And those, as we know from classroom experiences, are not something you just read about in an article and say, I'm ready to go with that. You really need the type of modeling that we talked about here. And so interestingly, to see these expectations of these principals as sort of a harbinger of where they want to see their schools and classrooms go. And they're banking on our teacher preparation programs doing a satisfactory job of preparing students for that future. So with that, I would love to be able to facilitate some questions here from the audience. We have 15 minutes that we can entertain your questions. They can come to anyone here on the panel, and or interestingly, to hear your comments and thoughts on all of this. And I have these wonderfully bright shining lights, so if you are waving to me in the back, you need to audibly wave if you have a question. Yes, ma'am. The community funding process is on.
I'll use my, sorry? Okay, it's an, I can't remember again. It's called the Community Reinvestment Act, or CRA. And if you go to digitalequity.us, it's got contact information. I can send you, so www.digitalequity.us, I can send you some additional information about that afterwards. If you'd like. Sorry, www.digitalequity.us, and there'll be more information posted there shortly.
I should have mentioned early on, we actually have out in the audience some sign-up sheets. If you would like to receive this presentation, and we will send that accompanying information as well. Please feel free to sign up there or give us a card or something. We'll be happy to do that. Yes, ma'am.
So on the digital topics where it says presentation URL on the ISTE app, if you've already saved that to the digital token, that's it, right?
Yes. Yes, over here.
John, it's California City University Monterey Bay. Thank you for one of the conference. And what I was saying was shameless plug for all the papers or a group that called MITE. It's the International Conference on Global Technology and Teacher Education. And the MITE conference has been held in Galway, Ireland, the last 2 years. So it's an international flavor, although we'll see what it's going to be like after Fred accent. But the conference is taking a lead from Ireland and coming to California in January. So January 12th and 14th, the MITE conference will be in LA, and we're looking for papers. So I hope that some of these papers will come to that conference. If you're interested in the conference, it's at www.mite2017.com.
And where did you say, sir, that was going to be this year?
In LA.
Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
I guess I wanted to ask Lori about her program a little bit. It looks like a really great model. We're trying to do some of those things ourselves, and I wanted you to maybe speak a little bit about how you originated those collaborations between the university courses and the classroom teachers, and how that sort of came about to be a sustainable project.
Sure. So about 2.5 years ago, the dean of our College of Education and the dean of the University of Louisville came together and decided that they wanted to bring faculty together, collaborate across institution as the two research one universities in the state. Felt that that would be a very powerful message, especially in looking at trying to change some state policy. And so every semester for the last 2 years, our faculty across programs get together. It's hosted in the fall semester by the University of Kentucky and in the spring semester by the University of Louisville. And then also with faculty attending our Next Generation Leadership Academy, really looking at how we want to innovate our own teacher preparation programs. That provided the impetus for us to be able to do the cross-institutional collaboration.
And how about within those middle school classrooms, how did you get that?
So we have, within our middle level program, we've had a strong partnership with the middle schools within Fayette County, where the University of Kentucky is hosted. And we started with teaching courses on site about 10 years ago. And we rotate between middle schools, so our students have different opportunities for student teaching. And that way, if we're in one of the middle schools for the embedded clinical, then they can do student teaching in a different middle school. So it just provides them with that diversity of placement.
Do you record when you're live streaming? Do you record those sessions so that you can look them later with students?
We have recorded them, and we've also had opportunities where we've had a graduate student come with us to cover the teacher's classroom while the teacher comes out to debrief with our students. And the teachers really love seeing the live streaming while they're out of the room because they like to see how their students are behaving when somebody else is in the classroom. And she's able to actually really talk through how behaviors can change when the classroom teacher is away. And that really helps our students in thinking about classroom management.
You know what I really liked about that, Lori, when you were describing that? I love the fact that the student teachers are there in the classroom and they have an immediate question. And they have a way to capture that and to send that on. It reminds me of some focus group work that we've done in Speak Up, where I sat with middle school and high school students that wanted to be able to do the same thing with their regular classroom teacher. The difference is they want an answer right then. So very interesting to capture that moment. Yes.
One more question. Are you using any performance assessments as like PPAT exams or something like that for your students to graduate?
So we started piloting a couple of different performance assessments. Our middle level program right now does what we call performance of learning, and it's at the end of their student teaching semester, and they get to choose what they want to demonstrate as an area that they feel that they've grown the most in. And it's a public venue, so we invite all of our faculty from within the college as well as our school partners and community partners to come in for those presentations of learning.
I think there was a question.
Yes, right there.
Yeah, I'm barely listening. Yeah.
Can you talk, any one of you, can you talk about the advantages or disadvantages of ebooks or textbooks and how your students perceive that?
There's a small question.
Well, I'm happy to start the conversation about that. One of the advantages of ebooks is that they're updated more easily and rapidly. And another is that there's all sorts of accommodations that can be made for students with special needs on an ebook. Print is actually a disabling medium. It isn't that students are disabled, it's that print is disabled. And ebooks, if they're not just PDF files put on a computer, which unfortunately too often they are, if they're really designed to use the technology to its full potential, then they offer lots of accommodations to help students learn. Not only students who might be formally dyslexic, but really all of us who would benefit from having lots of kinds of facilities at our fingertips. That said, they're still learning passively. And so it would be a mistake, in my opinion, to focus solely on ebooks, no matter how wonderful they are.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that as well. And I think it's, when we talk about static print text, there are also static e-texts. And they're e-texts that a student can simply interact with using highlighter tools or maybe a comment here or there. I won't plug any specific publishers, but the e-texts have really kind of evolved over the last couple of years. They're much more dynamic. There's an e-text that I use for one of my literacy courses that provides me opportunities as the instructor to highlight specific excerpts from that text and then pose a question to the students, so it's much more interactive. And they're also embedded with videos.
That was one of the things that we, that our faculty considered at length when they were looking at sustainability, because perhaps it was more affordable for students to get devices if we could use them. But overall, the cost was more, and they were really worried about cost. Again, being a Hispanic serving institution, being very, keen to what is it actually costing students. And they were leery of being too connected with the providers of that. Let me just say it that way.
Any other thoughts? Paul?
One of the advantages we haven't talked about with respect to all of the initiatives we've heard, and particularly what we experienced very early on, was that our pre-service teachers, when they went into the schools, they had a totally different status than pre-service teachers usually have, because the principal and the other teachers valued their expertise. And so most of our graduates became the technology leaders within their schools. So I think, the programs you've heard about really empower give pre-service teachers so that they're not low personal on the totem pole when they go into the schools.
I think that's a really interesting point, Paul. I know that in some of our conversations with some teacher preparation programs, they are very interested in making sure that their students get very good placement. And so as you're looking at from a competitive standpoint, maybe having that technology savviness or having that capacity building that the principals are looking for in terms of not only unlearning, but being able to relearn and learn new things, puts those candidates at a different level. So it's interesting that you actually saw that experience.
In terms of balance, there's one observation that I want to make about mobile learning, because we've talked about all the advantages, but there's some problems that are emerging as well. One of them is that there's kind of a race to the bottom in terms of schools' technology infrastructure. So in the name of saving money, a lot of schools are getting quite low-end devices for their one-to-one programs. And as somebody who develops powerful curricula, they won't run on those devices. I think that there's an assumption now in many schools, kind of a naive assumption, well, a device is a device is a device. So if you have a BYOD program and the affluent students bring something that's really powerful and the at-risk students bring something that's not very powerful, well, they don't worry about that as much as they should. If you're saving money by putting in a lot of devices that are basically internet utilities for browsing the web, but they don't have a lot of the capabilities that a high-end tablet or laptop would have, there's a lot that's being given up. And so one of the things that I like to see, both in teacher professional development and in pre-service teacher education, is people knowing what the strengths and limits of each device is, what its form factor, its graphical processing capabilities, the kinds of interactions it can take, what it will and won't run, because there needs to be more of a dialogue taking place with schools about what's the cost-benefit ratio for making different kinds of investments.
I'll pick up on that as well. I've worked specifically with the STEAM Academy High School in Lexington, and we launched the school 3 years ago and decided that we would do a BYOD model. And to Chris's point, a student who walks in with the mobile device being their phone, and a student sitting next to that child has a MacBook Pro, there's a huge digital divide there. And so what we've started doing with working with schools is having them purchase different kinds of devices for different purposes. So even in teacher preparation, we have a cart of Chromebooks because we know that when our students go out to a classroom setting where there's Chromebooks, they're very limited in what they're able to do with it. We have a set of iPads as well, which is a very different interactive device than a laptop or a Chromebook. So really providing some opportunities for schools to really think deeply about what their needs are for their curriculum and then being able to match those devices to those needs.
So one of the things I didn't talk about, well, it is connected to this, but I just didn't think about it. In our program, we actually have a requirement for a technology course that is specifically in education. So that led into the implementation working really well for us because the teachers all learn all different technologies, different devices, different kinds of ways to group, which plays into all their methods courses when they go out into the field. So I think it's important to have some kind of opportunity where they learn different devices, and they aren't all good for one. I mean, the iPad, the one that's in so many schools, in the work that I do for some grants that I work in, it really becomes a barrier because many of the tools don't work there. And I think those areas are being addressed gradually. And with the Chromebooks, I was just talking to someone from a school district this morning that was saying, there's definitely limitations there as well that need to be considered. So sometimes the laptop is the best device, ultimately, to be able to do really powerful projects, especially.
And if I could just add, building on your question about ebooks versus textbooks, I've been involved in a project, I've been funded a grant project using open educational resource materials, OER, right? And I found that the further away you get from the conventional textbook, the more of a sense of vertigo educators tend to feel about how do I manage my instructional strategies? How do I manage my content? How do I manage my classroom? I think that there's a sort of unstated, not quite explicitly stated, I think, in this conversation, is that there's a prevailing reliance on textbook-driven pedagogy and assessment. That's really a problem. And in the methods courses that I've taught, I found that it's a tremendously heavy lift to help pre-service teachers and faculty who teach these methods courses to rethink what it means to be teaching, to be facilitating learning. And that's really, our conversation, I'm learning a lot from this. It's reminding me how fundamentally this whole conversation is not about bits and bytes and RAM and ROM and technical stuff, as important as it is. It's really about the pedagogy. And if we want to change the pedagogy, we've got to get at partnerships, sustained relationships, to build the trust, to talk about, and it's a potentially very rude thing to ask a cooperating educator who's already donating lots of expertise, lots of time, and care and concern for the well-being of student teachers, right? We're already asking about to ask them to re-examine their own pedagogy, but we need to have that conversation. We need to have that together.
That's wonderfully said, Tom. As we sum up here, I think there's again, several reoccurring themes that are happening. And I think the one that keeps coming back to me, not only in the research that Project Tomorrow does, but in all the good work that is represented here, we don't have a recipe, we don't have a cookbook for how to do this well yet. We're still learning. We're all learners in this process. We've got some good models. We're learning things through those processes, but we still have a ways to go in terms of not only effectively using all of these digital tools, including mobile devices, effectively to change the learning process for students, but we also have a ways to go in terms of thinking about preparing that next great generation of teachers to be able to adapt to that. So I'd love to have you thank this fabulous panel, this dream team, for sharing all of their thoughts and wisdom. I learned so much today. Thank you to each one of you, and wonderful to have you here. As we said, we will continue to be around for a couple moments if you have some additional questions. Otherwise, we have loved the opportunity to be here. Have a good rest of your conference, and thank you so much for joining us.